Please do turn to Nehemiah chapter 4. It's been a number of weeks since we've been studying this series, the rebuilding of Jerusalem, that wonderful picture and type of the health and the prosperity of the church. Whenever the walls of Jerusalem were torn down and lied in a pile of rubble, then the cause of Christ was at a low ebb. And that's the same with the church. When we have a love for truth and for the gospel, the church prospers. And so the Lord had risen up Nehemiah out of obscurity, a choice servant. Before him there was Zerubbabel and Ezra. We thought about that. And upon this man's heart was a great burden laid, a burden for the Lord, a burden for the Lord's glory. And that's what we want to consider tonight. He was doing a great work. The first 3 chapters we've considered. He goes to King Artaxerxes, and his request is answered above and beyond what he even asked for. He asked for a little and he got much. He asked for permission, he was given permission and supplies. And so he goes, and the work, it takes great momentum. But if the book of Nehemiah stopped at the end of chapter 3, we might be tempted to think that the health, wealth and prosperity gospel had it right. That life as a Christian and for the church is just a bed of roses with all the thorns taken out. It's just comfort and ease, and everything will be successful. And all you have to do is just go out there. There'll be no opposition, no problems, no difficulties, no enemy, no opposition. And so we come to chapter 4. And as often in the Word of God, the first word is but. But. This is a turning point. But it came to pass. We've met this character before, one of the 3, the trio of enemies, Sanballat, Tobiah and Geshem, and here is the ringleader, Sanballat from Samaria, the governor of Samaria, and he wants to stop the work. Why was that? Why would he be, as it describes here, wroth? He took great indignation. He felt insulted. The word wrath means a form of heat was welling up inside him. Anger is never a good thing. If you feel yourself getting angry, you'll probably be irrational. You'll probably be impulsive. You'll make bad decisions. So here is Sanballat, very wroth. The reason, probably, we don't know for sure, is that at that time Samaria, with Jerusalem lying in a heap, Samaria had taken on a very important trading route. The passage of goods down to Egypt in the southwest, Samaria was a stopping point, and so it had become very prosperous. Usually money is at the motive of anger and greed, very often, not always, but seems that's a probable explanation. Sanballat heard. We came across him in chapter 2, and it was said there in verse 10, if you refer back to that, when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah his servant, his weak little left lieutenant, the Ammonite, heard of it, it grieved them exceedingly that there was come a man to seek the welfare of the children of Israel. There's Nehemiah. He's got a heart for the Lord's people. He's got a heart for the honor of the Lord. It hurts him to see the typical church lying in a heap. And Sanballat was grieved. Grieved about a wall, about a city, a historic city. So it seems probable he felt threatened. Well, we see that there will be opponents in all 4 corners of the compass, and we'll refer to that shortly. We see that there will be enemies surrounding Nehemiah in this work. North, east, south, and west. And the question that we have to ask tonight, and it's the question for us, how do we deal with opposition? My title tonight is Overcoming Opposition. We do have opponents. We have opposition, and they will be outside. Very sadly, as we'll see tonight, sometimes they will be inside the church. Some of us will become discouragers, will be negative, will see things that bring others down, and will amplify them, maybe exaggerate them. So they will be enemies, outside, inside, external and internal. What will happen? Will the work stop? Will there be a failure? Will it come to nothing? Of course not. This isn't Nehemiah's work. This is the Lord's work, and he's going about it. Everything he does is saturated by prayer. He's not compromising in anything he does. He's not using carnal methods, and he's laboring. The effort, the zeal for the Lord that we see here from Nehemiah, we cannot but be amazed and learn from his example. So we see this sudden change. Let's look at his enemies, the enemies in the north, the east, the south, and the west. Well, Samaria was in the north of Jerusalem. That's where Sanballat came from. If you look down at verse 7, it says, "But it came to pass," another but, "that when Sanballat," and Tobiah seems to be underneath his fingers, there he is, he comes from the east, and the Arabians, they come from the south, and the Ammonites and the Ashdodites, they come from the west. He's surrounded. There's no relief. Enemies all around. Sometimes we feel like that in life, don't we? We just feel encircled. We have materialism, secularism. We have false teachers. We have the representative state church, which promotes an anti-gospel, anti-truth, calling good evil and evil good. And we think we're so small. There's just such a small band. How can we do this work? Don't forget, these walls, 2 to 2.5 miles of wall, high, thick. Don't like to draw comparisons, but the work that's gone on next door will take considerably longer than the 52 days that it took Nehemiah to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, which was a gargantuan task by comparison. 52 days, the work goes on. So the enemies surround him, and our method tonight is to look at the 3 different waves. There's 3 quite distinct, quite different waves which come up to Nehemiah, and we're going to look at how he responds. I've got a book at home, and it looks at Nehemiah, and it looks purely at his leadership qualities. In fact, in America, there was a series of business conferences where Nehemiah was taken as an example of how you lead people, how you motivate them, what you do and what you don't do. It's extraordinary. The technique, if we can call it that, it's not, it's the Spirit of God, but the decisions that he takes, the method that he uses, this is a role model for leadership. We can all learn from this. Church officers, pastors, mothers, fathers, anybody in position of responsibility, learn from Nehemiah. It's a textbook in leadership. So let's look at the first of the waves of ridicule as they try to mend the 12 gates, the 2.5 miles of wall. And it's here in verses 2 and 3. Sanballat. And he spake before his brethren. He makes sure that lots of people know about his concern and his problem. Of course, he tells the whole army of Samaria. And here's the method he uses: questions, ridicule, mocking. Let's look at them, each one. The first one: what do these feeble little Jews do? I'm adding a few words to give you the emphasis. What do they think they're doing? This little group of ex-captives who come from afar, what do they think they're doing? Let's be honest. Look at them. A weak folk. What trivial things they're trying to do. Put a few stones on top of the other. The next question: will they fortify themselves? Will they build up themselves and become famous? The next question: will they sacrifice? I think that's a mocking sacrifice, saying usually when something started or finished of significance in the children of Israel, they sacrificed, but it seems as though Sanballat's saying, are they going to make this wall to be their sacrifice, their offering for their worship? Will they do it in a day? Oh, what mocking, what ridicule. Will they take this pile of dust and burned stones, because the walls have been burned and knocked over, and will they make those stones live again? They're just jeers, they're just comments, they're what we might call put-downs. I've heard it said in this town, oh, Providence, that strict church, that little church, that group of different people, it's a put-down. That's what it is. This is where the word of God is preached. This is where God's people dwell. And it's that sort of mocking that is spoken here. It's designed to demoralize. And you know that's the first method of Satan. It's a little bit more subtle. The odd throwaway comment, the odd comment from those that come in and they see the way we worship, maybe the way we dress with dignity for worship, as it being one of the most important things that we do in the week. What are these feeble Jews doing? What's this all about? Oh, this weak people. And then Tobiah joins in, verse 3. And here's a mocking comment. Even if a fox, a wily fox, goes up, even his 4 feet will knock over the stones. They built it so badly, it will fall over again, that stone wall. Or maybe we get put downs at work. People, you know that you're a believer, and they say something like this: you don't believe that, do you? Seriously, 2,000 years ago, you believe in that book? That holy book? Or they might say, oh, you don't want to go and listen to that man preach week after week. Why can't there be somebody different? Why can't they have something different than preaching? Or, well, I suppose you're going to convert me then, or try. That's the sort of things that we hear, isn't it? Or maybe somebody comes amongst believers and says that they just want to have control. And they make a comment about the leadership and say, well, they always like to have it their way. They always like to be in control. Comments, mimicking. This is what Satan does. It's really Satan's words. There's so many people that are hearing what Sanballat and Tobiah is saying. The words would have got back. The Chinese whispers would have got through to Nehemiah's people, and sooner or later he and they will have heard. Well, here's the response. That's wave 1. Demoralization and ridicule. There's no introduction. Verse 4, hear, O our God. Now there's a problem with this prayer. I say that carefully. When you look at the prayer, It's not the sort of prayer that we would really pray. He's saying, let these people struggle and suffer, and don't cover their sin, don't forgive them, and don't blot out what they've done, which is wrong. Well, that's what we call an imprecatory prayer. There are psalms that are written in that way. I read a quote that said, you've got to be a very godly man to pray in that way. You've got to really know you're walking with the Lord to pray in that way. Nehemiah is such a person. But to pray for damage and evil and destruction to be upon a people, that's not something that we should do, really. Very often, if at all. That's something that's in the wisdom of God and his sovereignty to determine. But Nehemiah nevertheless says, O our God, for we are despised. They're demoralizing us. Turn their reproach upon their own head and give them for a prey. Let the enemies that are round on the other side of them come and take them into captivity. Make them prisoners. Don't cover their iniquity. Well, he's turned to prayer, but it's a very specific prayer. And I think we can take from it this: God, be in control of this situation. Do what is right in thy sovereign will, whether it's to frustrate them, whether it's to turn them on themselves. You know what's right. Well, they bring it before the Lord. But verse 6, there's something else. Prayer is the first answer, always, for Nehemiah. But what's the second answer? Verse 6. So, we built the wall. We just couldn't care less. We just ignored them. We didn't listen. We just got on with the job and built the wall. And all the wall was joined together, and half the work was completed. Well, we don't know when exactly these comments and questions came, but half the job is done. And there's that lovely expression, the end of verse 6. Is this true of you and me? For the people had a mind, not just a heart. Sometimes the heart doesn't feel like work. But they had a mind to work. The mind ruled the heart. They had a mind to work. They ignored their feelings, because their feelings were probably not very helpful. Their feelings felt like giving in and listening. But their mind was to work. And so verse 7, does this first wave work? No, it came to pass that when this whole group heard what happened, verse 7, they were not just angry and indignant, but very angry. This stoked them up. And now they're going to act even more irrationally. Well, what a delightful thing it is. They turned to prayer and they got on with the work. That's a good example for us to follow. Let's look at the second wave. Verse 8. You notice they all conspired. All four of the groups, they got together, all of them. How often that happens. An unholy alliance. Do you know that can happen in the church sometimes? Somebody has a grievance. They're not prepared to take it to the pastor or the officers or a mature person. But they have to go and gather a little group together, and 2 becomes 4, becomes 8. And they conspire, all of them, together to come and to fight. This is the external enemy, but there's a warning there that we don't join in that example. We always minimize problems. We deal with them in private. We don't gather together. We don't get numbers. That's a worldly method. We need lots of us. We need to be confederate. We need to gather together. And we need to come and fight. And we need to stop the work. That's what they said in verse 8. This second method, violence and destruction. Let's come and fight. The power of numbers, lobbying. Let's gather together a big crowd and we will really hinder them. We will put them off. Well, to a degree they were successful, because half the workers, as we've read, no longer could build. They had to defend. But actually they were totally unsuccessful, because the Lord purposed that it would be so, and it seems obvious that those that were still working worked even harder, because they weren't hindered and they weren't distracted. They were prepared to use violence against the Lord's people. Mob violence. The rowdies surrounded Jerusalem, and they were going to try and put them off. Verse 9. I love the first word here. Nevertheless. Nevertheless. It didn't matter what they did, whether it was mocking, ridicule, whether it was a big army coming, gathering all these four groups together. Nevertheless, we made our prayer unto our God. That's a lovely motto, isn't it? In life, you have a trial, you have an attack from Satan upon your life and your walk and your family. Nevertheless, despite that, we made our prayer unto our God. You see, he resorts in the second wave yet again to prayer. Notice the ownership. We made our prayer unto our God. Oh, this is personal. This is felt prayer. This is earnest prayer. This is prayer that really matters, because they were concerned. They were somewhat anxious physically in their hearts, but they turned to prayer. Prayer unto our God. Is that it? Just pray. Well, no, that's not what the Christian life is about. We also take practical precautions. Verse 10. This is what Judah says. The strength of the bearers, you can probably use the word labourers, as in a building site. The strength of the labourers of burdens is decayed. The people carrying the bricks, the stones, the mortar, the rubbish, they're getting weak and tired. They're getting a bit disenchanted. And there is much rubbish. You can't build with all the rubbish around you, so that we're not able to build the wall. Oh, they've started to listen. Some of the taunts and the signs of an army and spears and weapons are beginning to get to the people of Judah. Verse 11. And our adversaries said, they're now listening and copying and repeating and amplifying what the enemy says. They shall not know, neither see. We're going to come and surprise them at night. And they won't be ready, and we will slay them. And verse 11, we will cause the work to cease. That's what the enemy wants to do. They want to stop the work. They want to stop Sunday school. They want to stop visiting. They want to stop our witness. They want to stop us meeting. Our adversaries said, I'm not interested what the adversaries said. What does the Lord say? Nehemiah first turns to prayer, but the people start to repeat. You know, when you repeat something with gossip, generally gets worse, doesn't it? So-and-so said so-and-so to me. Or be careful. Don't repeat what we shouldn't repeat. Keep it to yourself. Don't need to share everything, especially negative things and demoralizing comments made. Verse 12, and it came to pass that when the Jews which dwelt by them came, they said unto us 10 times. Well, usually in the Word of God, when that expression 10 times is said, it doesn't mean literally, it means often. They said it again and again and again. From all places whence ye shall return unto us, they'll be upon you. When the people that lived outside Jerusalem went back to their houses at night, there would be an ambush waiting for them. You see, the fear is beginning to get in. They're thinking that they will be vulnerable and they could be ambushed. And so, what does Nehemiah do? You see, he's a practical man. He doesn't just pray. He keeps the gunpowder dry, as they said of that famous general. Verse 13, therefore set I in the lower places behind the wall, and on the higher places I set people in families. This is a stroke of genius. Who are we going to fight most for to defend? People you don't know? Or your mother, father, son, daughter, auntie, uncle? He puts them in families, and he appoints one person from each family or something like that to bear swords, spears, and bows. They'll defend their families. They say that blood is thicker than water. We have to be careful of that in churches. Sometimes we can be overly loyal to our own family and disloyal to others. But here, Nehemiah uses normal, natural, human nature, looking after our own for a good purpose. But that's not enough. Verse 14, he gets up, he looks up, and he goes to the leaders, the nobles, the rulers, and the rest of them. And now he encourages. He says, don't listen. Don't be afraid. Remember the Lord. Oh, isn't that lovely? Don't listen to anybody who's an enemy of the gospel. Remember what the Lord has said. Remember what the Lord has done. Remember what the Lord told you to do. To pray, to take practical precautions. Remember the Lord, and look at this, which is great and terrible, awe-inspiring. Our God is a consuming fire. Our God is a match for all of their army on his own. Our God, don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, which is great and terrible. And you fight for your brother and sister, your mother and father. Don't just sit there and wait and hope. Sometimes Christians can say, oh, if the Lord wants to save, he'll do everything. Well, he will. Salvation is all of the Lord. But he uses means. Not always. He doesn't need to use them, but he delights to. He uses you, maybe me, and he uses means to protect. He didn't need to, but he said that you need to fight for your brethren, sons, daughters, wives, and even protect your own houses. And so verse 15, wave 2. What happened? It came to pass when our enemies heard that we knew what they were up to, and God had brought their counsel, their second plan, to naught, that we returned, all of us, to the wall and every one to his work, defeated. The second attack brought to nothing. Well, there's going to be a third. We've got time to look at that. The third. Judah had said, we can't build the wall. Judah had said, we're vulnerable. We've heard it again and again. Well, you see, Nehemiah is very deliberate. He says in verse 13, I set, I organized, I arranged. Things don't happen by accident in a church. We do have to plan and organize, not like a business. But we have to give people roles and make sure we know what we're doing. We have to communicate. And Nehemiah sets the people. He has a plan. And he organizes the people. And he starts to talk to the people, to encourage the people. He starts to go among them. And he starts to organize them in such a way that they take courage from one another. the violence and the threat of violence won't deter them. He takes a number of practical steps. Look here, he organizes that somebody should walk behind him with a trumpet. What's that about? One trumpet. Every time there was danger, his loyal trumpet blower will blow the trumpet, and the people will know that the army is coming, and the people will know to get their spears and swords ready. That's what the pastor needs to do. That's what we need to do. Warn of the dangers. That's what a trumpet is always about in the Word of God. In the Old Testament, it's about preaching clearly, warning, sending out the alarm so that people know what potentially is about to happen. The trumpet will sound. Here it is in verse 20. In what place, therefore, ye hear the sound of the trumpet, resort. Go back near your family and unto us, and once we've blown the trumpet, we've taken sensible precautions, our God shall fight for us. Well, that's the first one. But there's another one here. Anybody that used to travel home, they were commuting to Jerusalem, he says, let's stop that. You can now stay overnight with friends, with family. No more walking home at night. That would be foolish to walk home late at night when they've already told us that there's an ambush waiting outside. That would be to take silly risks. We don't do foolish things as the people of God. And then there's a final thing here in verse 23. The commentators sometimes say this is slightly in humour. I'm not sure. I don't know. Verse 23. So, this is Nehemiah, neither I, nor my brethren, nor my servants, in other words, the whole troop, nor the men of the guard which followed me, none of them got changed for 52 days, except when we had a wash. Well, I don't know whether that's humour or not, but I think there is a spiritual application there. But when it comes to battle and spiritual warfare, we need to be prepared to sacrifice a few creature comforts. We need to be willing to go a bit further. We need to be willing, so to speak, not to have a change of clothes so often. Willing to cut down on the time when we would be vulnerable, when we were doing things that were just really for our comfort in the middle of a war. I think there's a spiritual lesson in every verse, and the lesson in that final verse of the chapter is be prepared to take one or two sacrifices, even of leisure, comfort, ease, except for things which are absolutely necessary, for washing, just now and again. Well, there's 5 lessons to close. I hope we've seen them all. The strategies of Satan, mocking, ridicule, sometimes violence, and then rumours that get spread, and then the discouragement from even within. The people of Judah were discouraging their own folk. Secondly, look at Nehemiah's response. Prayer. Every time. Nevertheless, prayer, but always practical precautions. We don't pray that certain things, that the chairs will be put out on a Sunday. We put them out. We don't rely upon supernatural means. That's for the Lord to determine. We see the lessons of godly leadership from Nehemiah. He's a marvel of a leader. And we see that the Lord always vindicates his people. This is his work. It's his project, not Nehemiah's. He was just the leader. And those that are valiant for truth, that have a mind for work, the Lord vindicates them. The enemies disappear for a time. The waves come, the waves go, but the Lord enables the project to continue. And then finally, be prepared to sacrifice just a little. Our forebears sacrificed so much more. Sometimes we think it an inconvenience when we have to do something that perhaps we wouldn't normally do, or might take a bit of our leisure time. Is that anything for the Lord? They were prepared even not to change their clothes for 52 days, perhaps. Let's close our study tonight singing our final hymn, number 710. 710, another hymn of spiritual warfare. Christian, seek not yet repose, rest. Cast thy dreams of ease away. Thou art in the midst of foes. Watch and pray. 710.